Episode 9 title, The God That Forgot Its Name. Prologue, The Breath Between Stars. The world was still. Not in peace, no, peace was too fragile to last. But in recalibration. Since the Echoborn's choice, time had become pliant, less a chain and more a thread. Cities remembered old names. Rivers flowed in unfamiliar directions. Dreams surfaced as if from deep wells, and some never sank again. Far above, where the hollow star once glowed as compass and prison, there now hung a silent breach. A rip not in space, but in memory. From that breach came the breath. Not wind. Not air. But something deeper. Something that called only to those whose blood had brushed eternity. Aldric heard it first, awake in the quiet woods of New Namara, the map on his chest pulsing again. A low hum, like bone vibrating in stillness. Not words. But a name. One he had forgotten. One the world had forgotten. And in distant deserts where gods had once warred, the sand began to breathe. Chapter 1, The Sand That Remembers. The sky above the glass expanse was cracked, latticed with heat fractures that bled light but gave no warmth. Beneath it, dunes of pale ash shifted like memory losing form. This was no ordinary desert. It was the Reliquary of dust, where forgotten gods were said to sleep, not dead, but unremembered. Aldric stood at its threshold. The wind hissed in strange syllables. Beneath his boots, the ground was not sand but calcified time, ancient moments turned brittle. Runes flickered across his skin again, despite the hollow star's collapse. He wasn't alone. Aethoria descended beside him, wrapped in her silver-veined cloak, eyes heavy with dreams she hadn't shared. "You felt it too," she said, looking across the wasteland. "It's more than a summons," Aldric answered. "It's grief. Waking up." Behind them, Kaelin and Evelyne approached on sandwalkers, beasts bred from Wyrm and stag, their hooves leaving burned sigils behind. Evelyne stared at the horizon, where obsidian spires rose like broken ribs from the sand. "That's where it wants us to go," she said. "That graveyard of unspoken gods?" "No," Aethoria said. "That's where it wants to remember itself." They rode. The desert watched. Chapter 2, The Bones of the Forgotten Divine. The spires emerged slowly, half-buried towers of obsidian and brass, like swords stabbed into the belly of the world. As the group approached, the temperature dropped, though the sun still hung above them, motionless and pale. No sound but the sand underfoot and the low breathing of the wind beasts. Aldric paused as they passed through a shattered archway, once part of a temple. Above it, inscribed in a language none remembered. "We were made to be worshipped. Then made to be forgotten." Inside, they found the cathedral of the hollow pantheon. It was vast, impossibly so. The ceiling had collapsed inward, forming a spiraled sinkhole open to the white sky. Within the cathedral, pews of bone faced a colossal skeletal figure, half buried in the stone dais, its wings petrified mid-fold. Each rib was engraved with a name, but the glyphs twisted away when looked at. "This was one of them," whispered Aethoria. "A god. Or close enough." "No," Aldric said. "This is just the husk." Kaelin moved closer. "Of what?" Aldric placed a hand on one of the ribs. And the runes on his skin lit like fireflies in a windstorm. Vision struck, flashes of battlefields scorched by prayers, oceans split open by divine will, mortals reshaped into weapons. A god who walked his memory, whose name had to be removed from history because it had learned mercy. Evelyne caught him as he staggered back. "I saw it," Aldric murmured. "It tried to unmake itself. And failed." Sabrine entered last. Her blade was already drawn. "Something's still here." A low groan echoed from the sinkhole, metal and grief. And then, movement. Chapter 3, The Bleeding Sigil Below. The spiral sinkhole descended into darkness, layer upon layer of fractured stone, twisted roots, and broken statues clinging to the walls as if in prayer. From its depths came the scent of rusted iron and ancient regret. Aldric stood at the edge, the rune map on his chest pulsing not with light, but with pressure, as if warning, something below is trying to become itself again. Sabrine flicked her wrist, and her blade caught the starlight, though there was no star above. Kaelin gritted his teeth. Whatever that thing is, it's not dead. They descended. Each step deeper brought them closer to something wrong with gravity, like time refused to settle. Voices echoed in reverse. Shapes bled out of the stone, only to vanish when touched. Runes crawled along the walls, spelling out phrases and languages that had never been spoken aloud. Near the bottom, they found it. A sigil, 30 feet wide, burned into the stone floor. It pulsed with living light, not drawn from the hollow star, but something older, the root flame, the energy that once birthed the divine before the concept of worship. And in the center of the sigil knelt a figure. Naked. Genderless. Covered in wounds that wept ink instead of blood. No face. Only a blank plate of gold. Aldric stepped forward. You're the Forgotten One. The god that named itself away. The figure raised its head. And spoke, not in words, but in collapsing ideas. Their minds reeled. Kaelin gasped and fell to his knees, gripping his head. Sabrine nearly screamed. But Aethoria, she stood still. Unblinking. I remember you, she whispered. You were the one who gave me my first dream. The faceless figure extended a hand. And the sigil bled brighter. Chapter 4, The Crown Without a Name. The figure's hand hovered above the sigil, and from the center of the radiant glyph rose a crown, not made of metal, but of burned time, woven from ash and gold memory. It did not shine, it remembered. Aldric stepped toward it. He could feel every heartbeat he had ever lost, every moment his name had been spoken by someone who no longer lived. The crown pulled on that pain like a tide dragging bones from sand. Kaelin, regaining his balance, grunted. That thing feels like it's trying to wear me. Evelyne touched her dagger. It's alive. Not sentient, but willing. Aethoria approached slowly, voice taut. It was forged by the god's final breath. When it renounced divinity, it didn't die, it made this, so no one would carry its burden again. A crown no one wants, and yet everyone will be tempted to wear. The faceless figure extended both hands now, offering the crown without a name. Not demanding. Just waiting. Sabrine whispered, so, which of us? Aldric looked around the chamber. His breath frosted despite the heat. The map across his chest flickered between stillness and a single glowing line. This choice leads nowhere, but forward. I'll take it, he said. The crown burned like sorrow as it neared his head, and then... He wasn't in the room anymore. He stood in a city built from prayers, where no gods answered. He saw people shaping divinity from desperation. He saw what would happen if the crown touched unworthy heads. The rise of new tyrants. Worship without soul. A return to chains of belief. Then he saw what could happen if it was placed in the soil, not on a head. Planted like a seed. An idea. Not a rule. Aldric returned to the chamber, eyes shining with a violet glow. He knelt, and placed the crown at the center of the sigil. The chamber trembled, not in collapse, but in relief. The faceless god nodded once. Then unraveled into starlight. Chapter 5, The Harvest of Forgotten Things. When the faceless god dissolved into starlight, the sigil pulsed once, then went still. Not dead. Planted. The crown without a name no longer radiated power. It shimmered like a seed beneath the surface of memory, buried in the foundations of what had once been a place of worship, now transformed into a shrine of silence. Aldric remained kneeling. Not in submission, but in acknowledgement. Evelyne stepped to his side, voice hushed. Did you see it? What it could become? He nodded slowly. A garden. But not of gods. Of voices. Of people. The group ascended the spiral path from the sinkhole in quiet reverence. They passed mosaics that once depicted celestial war, now faded to near blankness. As if the divine had willingly receded. Above, the desert air was cooler. And it smelled of night. In the distance, where before there had only been dead dunes, they saw sprouts. Strange, silver-tipped flowers rising from the sand like stars poking through earth. The land remembers, Aethoria said. Now that forgetting has been forgiven. Sabrine raised an eyebrow. That was poetic. Are you feeling all right? Aethoria actually smiled. Kaelin wandered to one of the flowers. Touched it. It sang. Just a single tone, like a chime in a distant dream. They turned back toward Namara. The desert behind them now held a hum. Not of danger, but of something becoming. But they were not alone. Atop the dunes, silhouetted by the glimmering fracture in the sky, stood a new figure. Cloaked in tattered robes, its eyes like black mirrors, the wind parting around its frame. I remember what was buried, it said. And I come to collect. Chapter 6, The Collector of Lost Faiths. He descended without sound. Not floating, walking. Purposeful. Measured. The collector wore layered robes stitched from abandoned banners, each thread a creed, a vow, or a broken prayer. His face remained obscured beneath a bronze mask inlaid with worn runes, some fading, others bleeding through. Across his back hung a book made not of parchment, but leathered skin, its lock bound with thorned metal. Who are you? Sabrine asked, hand on her sword. The collector tilted his head slowly. A memory. No longer bound to reverence. No longer silenced by belief. Aldric stepped forward, chest still glowing faintly from his contact with the crown seed. You came for the god. I came for what you left behind. Evelyne narrowed her eyes. There's nothing left to steal. The collector raised a hand. From beneath the sand, bones stirred, skeletal statues of old faiths, long discarded, rose in supplication. Cracked idols, worn relics, masks half shattered. They weren't gods, the collector said. They were answers to unasked questions. And I am the only one still asking. Kaelin drew his blade. Then ask somewhere else. But Aethoria stepped between them. Wait. If he collects forgotten faiths, maybe he's what the world needs to remind it of who not to become. The collector turned to her. You speak of balance. I speak of purpose. You buried a seed. I come to see what it blooms into. Not to stop it. He paused, then pointed toward the horizon. But beware. Something else has awakened. Something that feeds on belief, not out of hunger, but out of emptiness. Aldric frowned. What is it? The collector's mask cracked slightly, revealing the echo of a smile behind it. The one who remembers everything, but was never remembered. Then he vanished, becoming mist. And the wind turned colder. Chapter 7, The One Who Was Never Named. A storm rolled across the dunes of the Reliquary, not of sand, but of voices. Whispers, long buried, clawed free from the wind, disjointed prayers, forgotten lullabies, confessions never heard. They wove together, spiraling above the horizon like a murmuring storm cloud. Aldric, Evelyne, Sabrine, Kaelin, and Aethoria stood at the desert's edge, watching as something began to form. It did not walk. It did not rise. It simply was. A void-shaped figure, its body made of morning smoke and fractured memory, drifted through the silence like a wound that refused to heal. It had no face, but eyes bloomed across its body, blinking with memories it had never lived. Echoes trailed behind it, memories it had stolen from the bones of the world. What is that? Sabrine asked, voice low. It's not a god, Aethoria said. It's an absence. The space where a god should have been. Or the cost of worship never given, Evelyne murmured. Kaelin stepped back. I feel like I knew it. Or maybe dreamed it? You didn't, Aldric said. Because it was never named. The creature turned toward them, and a ripple of unreality spread across the land. For a heartbeat, none of them existed. For a moment, their names were forgotten even by their own souls. And then, it stopped. It reached a hand, not a threat, but an invitation. Evelyne stepped forward, dagger in her palm. I'm tired of things offering deals. The thing did not speak. But the land beneath its feet rode in black fire. You shaped the seed. I am what grows in its shadow. Aldric clenched his fists. No. You're what we left behind. The entity tilted, as if in silent amusement. And then dissolved into the wind. But the damage was done. Where it had stood, the land had forgotten itself. The map on Aldric's chest now showed a void. A blank place. An erasure. It's coming, he said. And if we don't name it? Aethoria nodded. It will name us. Chapter 8, The Naming Ritual. They rode through twilight, where the desert met the broken cliffs of the Mirage Reach, a place said to reflect not what was, but what the land wished it had been. Here, reality shimmered with delusions, and even silence could deceive. Aethoria guided them to a cave mouth shaped like a yawning mouth. This is where the first prayers were spoken in this realm. And where names were once bound to meaning. The cave pulsed faintly with breathless wind, as though it remembered every word spoken in desperation. On the walls were carvings, thousands of names, etched in shifting stone. Some glowed. Others faded. A few pulsed erratically, fighting to stay. At the far end of the cavern sat the stone of ink, a monolith of obsidian, veined with veins of liquid memory. Sabrine drew her sword. We give this thing a name, and it becomes real? Yes, said Aldric. But only if we choose what kind of real it becomes. Kaelin scoffed. Let me guess. If we choose wrong, the world burns? No, Aethoria replied quietly. If we choose wrong, the world forgets it was ever anything else. They circled the stone. Aldric placed his hand on the monolith. The runes on his chest began to spread outward, glowing lines arcing from his ribs, up his shoulders, down his arms. They reached for the stone and began to write. We name it. The others added their voices, each syllable imbued with a memory. Evelyne gave it her father's dying scream. Kaelin gave it the name of his lost brother. Aethoria gave it her first dream, the one she never shared. Sabrine gave it her mother's laughter, unheard since childhood. Aldric gave it his silence. The stone of ink trembled. And then, in burning glyphs, the name carved itself in the air. Yurethis. The forgotten god was named. And it heard. Far across the dunes, the sky shattered into obsidian wings. Chapter 9, The Wings Over Silence. Night fell in an instant. Not as a shift of light, but as a suffocation. The wind died. Stars blinked out, one by one, until the sky above the Reliquary was a dome of utter black. And then came the wings, vast and slow, made not of flesh or bone, but the absence of sound. As they passed overhead, the world below lost its voice. Birds fell silent. Rocks ceased to echo. Even the breath in the hero's lungs turned mute. The newly named god, Yurethis, descended upon the world not as a conqueror, but as a listener. Its wings parted the air like funeral veils. Beneath it, dunes twisted into spiral glyphs, and the sands whispered in reversed tongues. Sabrine stood frozen, her lips moving, yet no sound emerged. Kaelin's sword was raised, but he couldn't hear the blade unsheathing. Aldric stepped forward, map runes glowing violently now. His voice, though silent, resonated through the ink, not the air. The tattoo on his skin expanded outward like a projection, a web of glowing lines rising above him like constellations remade. You have a name now, he shouted in memory. You don't have to feed anymore. Yurethis tilted in midair. Thousands of eye glyphs opened across its wings, watching, calculating, feeling. And then, it wept. Not tears, but black quills, feathers made of sorrow, rained down from its body. Wherever they struck, they carved letters into the land. Old letters. Forgotten alphabets. One quill struck Aldric's chest. It didn't wound, it wrote. One chance remains, he heard, in thought, not word. Give me purpose, or I will find it myself. Aethoria reached out to touch one of the feathers, but it turned to ash in her hand. This thing was never meant to be known, she whispered. But now it is, said Evelyne. So we write its ending, or it writes ours. Chapter 10, The Ink War begins. At dawn, if it could still be called that, the world did not brighten. The sun rose behind a veil of shadow feathers, caught in Yurethis' endless wingspan. Its light passed through ink, twisting as it reached the ground. The reliquary was changing. Glyphs bloomed across the desert floor, expanding, merging, rewriting. Mountains flickered into pyramids, rivers reversed their flow, and forests emerged where dunes had been moments before. Yurethis was rewriting the world by memory, but not its memory. Everyone else's. This is an authorship war, Aldric said. And our lives are the ink. In the canyon beyond Mirage Reach, ancient runes cracked open into gateways, spilling forth creatures made from forgotten fables, wolf-headed saints, child kings made of bone and starlight, sorrow nuns whose faces were inkblots that bled doubt. Each believed itself true. Each was written by someone, sometime. Each had a name etched in blood and longing. And they had come to reclaim the story. The group fortified at the old cathedral, where they had first found the crown without a name. Sigils were carved into the walls, forming protection barriers of unmade language, symbols that even Yurethis seemed to hesitate before touching. Kaelin grunted, sweat lining his brow. What now? We wait for the world to collapse into footnotes? No, said Aethoria, eyes glowing. We write back. Using the stone of ink, the group began inscribing their own counterglyphs, shaping a lexicon of resistance. Evelyne etched memories of her fallen comrades, so they could exist again, however briefly, and fight. Sabrine inked her blade with a truth spell. What you cut remembers the truth of what it was. Kaelin laughed and scrawled crude hero songs across his armor, turning each into protective wards. Aethoria, her hands trembling, wrote down her entire life story, offering it as a spell of anchoring. Aldric, finally, began to map out a new constellation across his chest, a myth not yet told. A possible future. From above, Yurethis saw. And for the first time since it was named, it hesitated. You give me shape, its voice pulsed in the earth. But I was born to be everyone's story. Who dares be louder than memory? Aldric raised his hand, the fresh constellation glowing on his skin. We do. And the world shuddered, as the ink war truly began. Chapter 11, The Library of Unwritten Wounds. The journey to the Library of Unwritten Wounds began in silence, deeper than the silence of Yurethis' wings. This was the hush that followed the rewriting of history, when memory refused to reconcile with what it had become. They traveled through shifting ruins, temples made of bone, towers made of melted scripture, tombs labeled with names that none of them had ever spoken, yet felt familiar. This place, Evelyne murmured, I think I was buried here once. We all were, said Aethoria. In lives we never lived. At the base of a shattered obsidian obelisk stood the entrance to the library, no door, no gate. Only a mirror of black water floating midair. The surface reflected not faces, but wounds, scars old and new, griefs never named. Sabrine stepped through first, and screamed. The others followed. Inside, the library was endless. A spiral of floating tomes and bleeding scrolls, all suspended in weightless orbit. Every book bore a wound as its title, The Brother Who Never Came Home. When I should have spoken, I betrayed her because I was afraid. These aren't just memories, said Aldric. They're regrets. Yes, came a voice, dry, old, and tired. And some of them still wait to be rewritten. The librarian stepped into view, a hooded entity of parchment and twine. Where its face should be, there was only a spinning ink glyph, constantly rewriting itself. Yurethis has taken the unwritten. It consumes the regret because it is hollow. But you still bleed. So you can still write. It extended a hand of paper, offering them each a book bound in pale leather. To fight it, you must give form to what you feared to face. Aldric opened his. It showed a future where he had taken the crown, where he ruled as a god king, adored and feared, but utterly alone. This is who I could become. No, said the librarian. This is who you might already be. Each of them read. Each of them wept. Each of them left the library carrying not just weapons, but accounts. Pages of identity inked in pain. Outside, the wind had changed. The glyph storm had calmed. Yurethis was waiting. And it was no longer a creature. It was a place. Chapter 12, The Kingdom That Was a Wound. They emerged from the library into a world subtly different. The dunes had flattened into smooth plains of vellum. The sky bore no sun, only a ceiling of parchment cloud, and the wind no longer howled, it rustled, like pages being turned in rapid succession. Footprints left behind them bled ink, vanishing after seconds. Aldric looked ahead. The horizon now bent upward, not curved like a planet's edge, but folded, like a page closing in on itself. And there, resting across the skyline like a fortress built from sorrow, was Yurethis, not as a being now, but as a city. Towers of silent stone formed from forgotten churches. Bridges made of sentences never finished. Archways written in languages extinct before their first breath. The whole thing breathed, not air, but memory. Not life, but intention. This isn't a lair, Evelyne said. It's a kingdom. A wound, said Aethoria. That grew teeth. At the city's gates stood watchers. Tall, faceless forms cloaked in scribe robes, their hands were placed with quills, their eyes covered in sealing wax. They did not speak. They simply parted, allowing the group to enter. Inside, streets shifted beneath them. Cobblestones bore their own names, and some whispered back. They passed statues of moments, not people, cast in bleeding bronze, a father letting go of a child's hand, a soldier realizing they would not return, a queen whispering her final secret to no one. This city isn't built of matter, Aldric said. It's built of things no one could hold on to. And then they reached the throne room. A vast amphitheater, layered in concentric rings of collapsed altars. At the center was not a throne, but a mirror, cracked and yawning. And inside it, Yurethis, restored to form, but not whole. Its wings were now parchment scrolls. Its body a cathedral. Its face the one each of them feared the most, their own, reflected back. You gave me a name, it said, its voice made from every word they had never said aloud. Now let me return the favor. It raised a hand, and ink surged like a tidal wave. Fight? Kaelin asked. No, Aldric whispered. Right. And they did. As ink roared toward them, they drew blades inked with meaning, parchment charms etched with new truths, and stepped forward, not to end Yurethis, but to teach it what it meant to live with a name. Chapter 13, The Battle of the Named and Nameless. The ink crashed over them, but it did not drown. It resisted, tested, crawled into their wounds like ancient guilt, trying to rewrite what they believed. But each of them, now holding the pages of their regrets, used those scars not as weakness, but as weapons. Aldric raised his blade, its edge etched with constellations written in bloodline glyphs, and slashed through the ink, turning language into light. The map across his chest pulsed violently, one line glowing brighter than the rest. Here is where you became yourself. Sabrine danced through the surge, carving truth into every shadow. Her sword no longer sang, it confessed. With each strike, she sliced away illusions, and Yurethis held in voices not its own. Kaelin, wrapped in armor scrawled with war songs and crude graffiti prayers, was a storm of brute resistance. The ink tried to claim his memories, but they were too loud, too defiant. He bellowed names the world forgot, giving them form in battle. Evelyne threw blades like punctuation, each a sentence finished, a grief resolved. Her shadows turned against Yurethis, now loyal not to emptiness, but to identity reclaimed. And Aethoria, she did not fight with steel. She sang. A hymn in a language she had only just remembered, full of fractured notes and starlight syllables. With each phrase, the city trembled. Towers wept. Statues crumbled into dust, no longer needed. Yurethis recoiled, its faceless form flickering. It split, becoming 1,000 versions of itself, the god it might have been, the tyrant it never chose to become, the child praying in a forgotten ruin. Each form cried out. We were never meant to end this way. Aldric stepped forward. Then don't end. He threw down his blade. The others followed. One by one, they laid down their weapons. Yurethis paused. For the first time, it hesitated not in hunger, but in grief. What do I do? It asked, voice crumbling. Aethoria stepped forward. You live. You change. You let go. The throne mirror cracked completely. And light spilled through. Chapter 14, The Fracture of Names. The throne shattered. Not with violence, but with a quiet surrender. From the cracked mirror poured light and ink in equal measure, forming a spiral cyclone around the heroes and Yurethis. Names, their true names, hidden names, forgotten names, floated like paper butterflies through the chamber, each one glowing with a story. Yurethis began to come undone. Its body, half cathedral, half void, peeled away layer by layer, each revealing a version of itself that had been erased, rewritten, or deliberately forgotten. Child, god, tyrant, prophet, monster, martyr. And at the center, a trembling wisp, no larger than a candle flame. Shapeless. Genderless. Timeless. It whispered, not aloud, but into each of their memories at once. I did not ask for power. I was made from everything no one wanted. Evelyne stepped forward, placing a hand over her heart. So were most of us. The map across Aldric's chest slowly dissolved, the glowing constellations unwinding like ribbons. Your unmaking, Aethoria breathed. Because you've finally accepted you don't need to be what they wrote. The wisp flickered. Will I vanish? Only the version that hurts, said Sabrine. The rest can stay. If you want. And then came the final fracture. Each of them felt a name whispered in their bones, not given to them, but offered by Yurethis. A gesture of gratitude. Of trust. Of shared authorship. Aldric spoke it. You are. Anara's. The word rippled outward. The ink stilled. The city of memory collapsed not into rubble, but into seeds, tiny motes of story that flew off into the sky, each ready to bloom elsewhere, for someone else. Anara's pulsed once with golden light. Then drifted upward, no longer a god, no longer a wound. Just a name, finally free to be forgotten without pain. And silence returned, not empty, but whole. Chapter 15, The Quiet Rebellion. They stood amid the ruins of a city that had never truly existed, watching its last remnants dissolve into starlight and ink. The ground beneath their feet no longer shifted. It held them. It remembered them. It's over, Kaelin said, rubbing the ink-stained hilt of his blade. No, said Aldric. It's only unwritten. They gathered near the site where Anara's had vanished, the air still warm with afterglow. A seedling pushed through the cracked stone floor, a white flower flecked with black script, its petals whispering things only the soil could understand. What happens now? Evelyne asked. Sabrine turned, eyes sharp. The war wasn't just with a god. It was with the way we remembered pain. The next war will be worse. Why? Aethoria asked gently. Because it'll be about truth, Sabrine replied. And who gets to keep it? The five of them stood in a circle, each changed, not with scars, but with stories written in the marrow of their bones. They had not defeated a god. They had forgiven one. The ink upon Aldric's chest faded. But in its place was something else, a name he had never spoken aloud, now etched just above his heart. Not his birth name. Not the one whispered in prophecy. A new one. His own. There are others like Inara's, Aethoria whispered. Other gods made from silence. Then we find them, Evelyne said. Kaelin looked at the horizon, where morning burned through the ink-thinned clouds. We stopped pretending the past was ever finished. They walked away from the reliquary. Behind them, the white flower swayed. Somewhere, unseen, a nameless god smiled. And the world, for the first time in centuries, chose not to speak, but to listen.